going to talk to you about chess at all. I'm actually going to talk about something entirely different, something called the Oxus treasure. You'll find out in a moment. We don't actually know exactly when it was discovered, although it was around 1880, or who discovered it, though apparently they tried to sell some parts of this treasure as scrap gold, so probably they didn't want anyone to know who they were. We do know it was found by the Oxus River, which is probably not much of a clue for anyone who's not a well-read classical scholar. So to save anyone getting out Google Maps, I'll tell you it's in the country we now call Afghanistan, and its modern name is the Amu Darya. We do, however, know that this hoard is one of the most important relics of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, and anyone who sees it cannot fail to be astonished by its beauty. One of its most famous pieces is an incredibly detailed model chariot with 3 horses and 2 riders, around the size of a Matchbox or Hot Wheels car, but made entirely from solid gold. We in London are also exceptionally lucky that almost all the collection is in the British Museum, amongst other priceless treasures in the ancient Near East galleries. And you can view it on any day of the week in exchange for the impressive sum of no money at all. Going back a few years, when I was at school, I'm afraid to say I was not particularly inspired by the history that I was taught. We touched very briefly on the rather exciting ancient Egyptians, before quickly skipping through the Greeks and Romans in about a term, and then jumping on to the Norman Conquest, the Battle of Bosworth, Tudors and Stuarts, all the way, seemingly without any of my teachers realising we'd already studied all of these topics several times. In fact, the history that most interested me when I was at school was not learnt in history lessons at all. It was learnt in Latin lessons, or Greek, or later on Russian, in the case of the 20th century history that fascinates me and now fills much too much space in my tiny house. If you skip forward around 15 years to when I was training to be a teacher, at first glance, I was slightly disappointed to see that the history syllabus didn't seem to have changed much at all. I browsed the headings of what was then the government-imposed curriculum, and the same names were there: Anglo-Saxons, Normans, Tudors, Stuarts, Victorians. Part of the problem for us is that we're very lucky to live in a country with a long, complicated and interesting history, and trying to fit the whole lot into 1 or 2 lessons a week between year 3 and the point where children choose their GCSEs is an impossible task. Those of you who follow history and archaeological news will surely have heard of the amazing discovery earlier this year of 2 Bronze Age houses just outside Peterborough, which have allowed historians to completely rethink what they thought they knew about how long civilized society has existed in this country. Unfortunately for teachers, that's also extended the history curriculum backwards by about another 1,000 years. Fortunately, though, my enlightened tutor at Canterbury Christ Church University was not willing to tread the same dull path as those who'd gone before him. So for our first history lecture, instead of sitting in a sweltering classroom, we went outside. We walked around the corner for 5 minutes to the Church of St. Martin, which is supposedly the oldest Christian church in the entire English-speaking world, and also the site of King Ethelbert's baptism by St. Augustine as the first Christian king of England. However, I learnt an even more important lesson that day. As significant as this church is by itself, it was actually built on the foundations of a much, much older civilization. Our tutor made this quite obvious as he made us kneel on the wet ground while he scraped the moss off the Roman bricks that had been looted from Canterbury's ruined Roman buildings and then recycled in the 5th century AD to build the church. My travels also took me to Mantua in northern Italy, which is still one of my favourite cities in the world, and I saw an even more obvious example there. Although Canterbury is very lucky amongst English cities in its Roman remains, it still can't hold a candle to the treasures of the Italian cities. On my first morning on holiday in Mantua, my wife and I had breakfast in the Piazza Sordello, which is surely a contender for the most beautiful square in a country that's full of very beautiful squares. We were admiring the fish-tailed battlements of the perfect 15th century ducal palace, and then we noticed a small modern construction in one corner of the square, which looked quite interesting. We investigated, and we were rewarded with substantial remains of an almost complete Roman house, with frescoes on the walls, amazing mosaics still on the floor. They'd only just excavated the palace, even though they'd only just excavated the house, even though they knew it was there, for fear of disturbing the ducal palace above it. And how amazing to have the problem of not being able to decide which century's priceless relics should be excavated next. Anyway, back to London. When I taught history to year 3, Thinking of all of the above, one of my very favourite trips was to the British Museum, where a skillfully costumed actor impersonating King Darius II of Persia entertained our boys and engaged them. They were dressed as Athenians at the time. He engaged them in a lively debate about whether their city-state should actually give up trying to defend itself against the Persian army and join the much more powerful Achaemenid Empire. What I loved about it was that it opened our boys' eyes to the history taking place outside of our cosy European bubble. Because when I was at school, I don't remember being taught that anything very interesting was happening in the Near East between the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks. But surrounded by the Oxus treasure and other staggering relics from the Apadana at Persepolis, which was the largest building in the world at that time, the boys of 3C could not fail to be moved by the achievements of this incredible empire. And this is where we find my most powerful and most enduring memory of Mikhail, who took part in this visit in March 2014. The boys in my class had been divided into groups by King Darius to engage in a treasure hunt around the gallery. I was circulating between the groups, pointing out my own favourite exhibits, and I came across Mikhail standing speechless in front of the case containing the Oxus treasure. He and I stood side by side just for a moment, each having our own quiet reflection on the beauty and significance of what we were looking at. And then the spell sadly was broken by the noise of the next school group coming into the gallery. But I've kept that moment in my memory as one of the clearest signs I've ever seen of the open-mindedness and receptiveness of young learners, the joy of discovery of those who are not yet burdened by our adult prejudices and received ideas. And I will cherish that memory of Mikhail forever. Thank you for listening. Okay, round 5.